Dave Ricks, great to see you again.
Good to be with you, Eric.
Dave, when President Trump became ill with COVID-19, he was treated with the kind of therapy that Eli Lilly and Company, your company, is developing for the coronavirus, an infusion of monoclonal antibodies. Yet for months, vaccines have been getting all the attention and, by some estimates, 10 times as much federal funding. Why so much focus on vaccines and not on therapies?
Great question. My point of view, not speaking for the whole health community, is that we need both. That, of course, vaccines for many patients, many people, will allow them to not contract the virus. It is a key part of the exit strategy for this pandemic. There are many challenges with the vaccine process, producing enough, ensuring safety, public education, et cetera. It deserves, I think, a full effort. And I think you mentioned the ratio of public spending on this in the US, but I think they've allocated $10 billion or something to work on vaccines. That is a very small sum compared to the economic impact that we've seen with this pandemic. So it's, I think, a wise investment by itself. You could ask, why don't we spend more on therapeutics as well? And I think that would be the right thing to do, because the best vaccines early won't protect more than 50 or 60% of those who receive them. That's the FDA standard. And that not everyone will choose to be vaccinated. And so that this disease will become endemic and will continue to spread. People will get sick at a rate, and medicines like monoclonal antibodies could help prevent the worst parts of this illness. So we're optimistic about their role, and new data will be emerging very soon. And we think these will be in broad use over the course of the next several months.
Would you like federal funding, or is Lilly better off not having received money from the government?
Well, we've chosen not to receive any money. I think the purpose of this kind of funding is really twofold. One, to de-risk spending research time and effort on these antibodies, and two is to help scale manufacturing. In our case, I decided along with our head of R&D the last week of February, we were going to make a medicine for COVID-19 for monoclonal antibodies. We decided to do that because it was something we can do, a good thing to do for the world, and then we had unique capabilities to move quickly and get that done. So we saw this as just a responsibility, not necessarily as a financial constraint. We're well capitalized and have lots of cash flow. We also are one of the largest manufacturers of monoclonal antibodies in the world already. So by rearranging our capacities and then forming new partnerships, we could create quite a bit of capacity within our umbrella. We've done that so far. So no need for that. What we do hope is that these get reimbursed, that well-developed markets pay for the therapy so that we can cover our cost of research and manufacturing. And that's what we're in discussions with many governments about now.
Dave, in just 6 months, not 6 years, Lilly was able to generate clinical data that proved antibodies can neutralize the virus. It's remarkable to anyone who's familiar with what goes on in the pharmaceutical industry and in biopharma. How are you able to compress the timeline so dramatically?
Yeah, it is an amazing story. And my hat goes off to all of our scientists as well as our collaborators that have literally worked every weekend and every day, sometimes 16, 20-hour days, since late February to get to the data we just released and will continue to release. So there's a huge human effort here that can't be underscored enough. But I think there were two main things that happened in this process. The first is that actually viral targets versus other targets for drugs using antibody technology are not that difficult scientifically. These are foreign antigens to the body. Your body's natural response is, in fact, antibodies. And our starting place for this work was a human's antibodies. We culled through a COVID patient's response to the virus and found the very best ones that could be then made into medicines for others. And so we sort of skipped some of the early science steps where you have to find models that simulate human disease, et cetera. Here we had human disease and human response to the disease. So we were pretty confident and could move quickly because of that. The second thing we did was do things in parallel. And probably the most striking one, Eric, was beginning of commercial stage production, which we made the decision to start in April before we had even dosed a human with the drug. And that is very unusual in our industry. That usually doesn't start that till you've proved something really works. So we cleared out a plant in New Jersey. We dedicated it to making our lead monoclonal antibody. We began a partnership with Samsung, a big contract manufacturer in Korea, and began working on other nodes in the network. And by July, we were producing commercial grade product, which is going to be available here in October, should the medicine prove to be very effective and receive approval by the FDA.
Dave, has your company and perhaps the government as well learned things over the course of this pandemic that will, if you like, change the game for drug development and treatment development going forward?
Certainly, that has happened. First of all, I think the way we've worked with regulators has been truly unique, and I think there's a lot of discussion and criticism about government's response to this pandemic. But one thing, and I say this in the most nonpartisan way, that really has worked is the ability to change how conversations can occur, to be much less bureaucratic and regimented about regulatory interactions, and really work as a team to move a medicine to patients. Everyone concerned about doing so safely, of course, and not doing anything that would hurt people, but moving as quickly as we can. I hope elements of that will persist into other therapy areas. Lord knows the world needs Alzheimer's medicine. We need new antibiotics. We need better drugs for diabetes and other serious conditions like cancer. So hopefully that way of working can stick around. I think the other thing that we have to have a conversation about is preparedness for pandemics. And we were able to move very quickly because of what I described before, and it installed capacity to make antibodies and do so at scale very quickly. That didn't just happen. That happened because we found success and have good returns on our other parts of our business. But certainly we've learned how we could do this even quicker than next time by not having a cold start, but a ever warm effort across the industry on monoclonal antibody preparedness. Probably we can have the same conversation on vaccines as well. And I think that would be very helpful for future pandemic preparedness.
Dave, can you hazard a guess right now as to how much faster you might be able to develop new drugs or new treatments in the future on the basis of these pandemic learnings? And perhaps as well, how much faster new drugs might get to the public because of what regulators have learned?
Yeah, so we're standing here now about 7 months and a bit after we started our program. That's very fast, as you pointed out to begin with. I could imagine we could shave at least 2 months off of that time to a commercial scale product if we had done a few things differently. I think one of those is this idea of ever warm, so that as soon as a new pathogen emerges, in this case by early January, we knew in China that there was a very novel coronavirus emerging, we could begin that work. It really didn't start until later in February for us. The second thing is recruitment to clinical studies. This is a vexing problem across all therapy areas we work in, and it's probably hard for common listeners to understand, but today it takes more time than you could imagine to find the right subjects to get in the right study. And even during a pandemic, that's been challenging. So we've spent at least 2 months recruiting studies out of this 7-month time period, where really there's enough patients out there, but we just haven't connected them fast enough. Using digital capabilities, having better testing to begin with would be helpful. And then public awareness of the importance of clinical trial research early in pandemic response. I think many people want to do their part to progress the science, but just don't know how to.
Dave, anyone paying close attention will have noticed that President Trump received the Regeneron antibodies and not the Lilly antibodies. Is that a curse or a blessing?
Well, I've been asking myself that for the last 4 days as well. Certainly, it's done one important thing, which is raise up the discussion about antibodies and their importance in helping people get treated, particularly people with high-risk comorbidities. Age and weight have been discussed here, but we know hypertension, diabetes, et cetera. That's the right place to use this kind of medicine. The truth is, Regeneron had an open compassionate use study. We did not. And we are that led to some of the speed of response on the day he was treated. I think it's fine. We're not competing with Regeneron here. There aren't enough. There are more patients than there is supply. So there aren't enough competitors in a way to really solve the pandemic. We hope they're successful. I'm sure they hope we're successful, and together we can make an important dent in the disease. This has helped, I think, this strategy more than anything.
Have you experienced or do you anticipate a surge in requests for compassionate use?
We're beginning to experience that now, Erik, and we're setting up a facility to manage that better. Under the FDA rules in the US, there's a single patient IND pathway. That's what people have been requesting so far, and we've been granting those based on the urgency of need, et cetera. So it's happening. Of course, ultimately, the real answer here is for the FDA to approve under the emergency use authorization procedure, the Lilly monoclonal antibodies, both a single therapy and combination. That's what we're advocating for, and Regeneron. And then people could get them widely, and it won't be about who your doctor is or who you know. It'll be anyone. And we know health disparities in this country are a major issue. I think the EUA pathway is really the way to address that.
So what is Lilly's timeline for FDA emergency use authorization?
Well, it's the FDA's decision to make. We have to apply for it. I can tell you those discussions are underway, and we would hope such an approval would be imminent.
Imminent as in we're talking days, weeks?
Days or weeks. Days or weeks. There's always, we want to be sure it's safe and effective and the right precautions are around it, but it's certainly imminent in our world is days or weeks.
Dave, I don't need to tell you that there are significant obstacles to manufacturing antibodies at scale. What is Lilly's capacity for manufacturing right now, and how ambitiously can you expand it?
Well, we've taken a very aggressive approach there, Erik. As I mentioned, going back to April, before we even had a candidate in the clinic, we were working this problem knowing we had to land something in a big capacity later. We didn't even have the product defined. The first thing we did was we worked with the FDA to clear out an entire monoclonal antibody factory of the other products it makes and move them to other nodes in our network. So we have a dedicated site here in the US where we're making product as we speak and have been since midsummer. The second thing we did was we signed an agreement with the largest contract manufacturing organization for antibodies in the world, based in South Korea, and we cleared out several of their suites to make this product. They're doing that now in 2 key lines they have there. The third thing we did was we then rearranged some more things over in Ireland, so we have a European base of supply. And then just a few weeks ago, we announced a major collaboration with Amgen, who has rearranged their network and will be using their Puerto Rico site to make significant quantities of the antibody. That all said, there still will be a shortage, and we'll have to work with officials to make sure the right patients with the highest risk in the countries that are having outbreaks receive the medicine. But I think we've done quite a bit, really at unprecedented speed, to make sure we can bring as much volume to the fight as we could.
Dave, the United States clearly wants to secure as much as possible of viable vaccines and viable treatments for the coronavirus. How do you balance the needs of your country, or the demands of your country, I should say, against the needs of the world?
Yes, it's a great question, and we have strong views on this. And that is, we think that this medicine should be matched closely to where the disease outbreak is occurring, not based on national borders or the ability to pay. That's our policy. And so what we will be doing is periodically, maybe in 2-month increments, reassessing where to assign volume based on the outbreak. Now today, sadly, a majority of that outbreak is in North America, in the United States. So a good portion early will go to the US for sure. But we also know countries like Brazil and India are suffering significant outbreaks, and their ability to pay is less. We're not having an auction to the highest bidder here. We're going to allocate the product based on where the health need is. And then we're going to put out there for the world our pricing, which will be indexed to gross national income per capita. so that the ability to pay will be based on a country's wealth, not based on other factors that could come into play. If it turns out the disease is all in poor countries, we'll probably lose money on this, but it will solve a lot of problems and save some lives that wouldn't have been saved otherwise. If it's all in rich countries, so be it. But we're going to assign product to where the problem's happening. And recognizing that's dynamic, Erik, if we had this available in March, we would have sent all our product to Italy. And it would have been a mistake to sell a year's supply to Italy if we needed it in New York just a few months later. So we'll need to do this in a very dynamic way, and hoping to form partnerships with governments to do this around the world.
At the moment, all of these antibody treatments are still experimental, and they require intravenous infusion in a clinical setting. In the future, do you think it'll be possible to go to your doctors or perhaps even the local pharmacy and get an antibody shot the way we now go and get a flu shot?
I do think that's possible, and we're actively working that problem. It's faster to do infusion, and given the shortage of material, it's a way to get the antibodies in your body with the least amount of waste, meaning antibody that doesn't actually get to an active site. We know that from a deep clinical experience. But there's two other strategies we're pursuing, looking at both of them. One is subcutaneous. That would be the easiest, where you could self-administer with a shot in your belly or your rear end, a small amount. To get to there, we'll need to have very potent antibodies. Now, it looks so far that the lead antibody from Lilly in monotherapy, the one using one antibody, is highly potent. Publications will be out soon describing that. That one has a chance to get to sub-Q. The other strategy is what they call IV push, where you get a line in your arm, much like you're giving blood or even lab samples when you go to the doctor for cholesterol and other things. And rather than take out blood, you push in medicine. So that's a very quick and nurse-administered process that can be done outside of a hospital setting, and would be ideal to get to that step too.
Dave, the public has been led to believe that not only is a vaccine coming, but that it will relatively quickly produce herd immunity on a global scale. From your point of view, is that realistic, or are we going to be living with some form of the coronavirus for years to come?
Yeah, probably the latter, unfortunately. And I think I say that for two reasons. One, early vaccines are just that. We may get lucky and one would have a 70, 80, maybe even 90% effectiveness, meaning for everybody that takes it, you'll have a period of time where you'll be protected. And even our best vaccines now are 90% would be a great number. The FDA standard for approval is 50%, 50. So they're obviously expecting something less. And I think it would be surprising to have a highly effective vaccine on the first go. They'll improve through time, and they'll improve in two ways. One is the percent of patients who are vaccinated that respond. Hopefully they'll go from 50 upward. And the other is the duration of the response. That's unknown today based on both the the virus's changes in its own genetics, which we're still learning about, and the vaccine technology we're using. We're using relatively new technology for these early vaccines, this mRNA technology. So those are unknowns. So at least at the beginning, when everyone gets vaccinated the first and second time, most of them require 2 shots, by the way, as well, we'll have some gap probably between an ideal approach versus where we are at that point. The other big factor, Erik, is many people may choose not to be vaccinated, and that's a tragedy. But even in a robust flu season, we often see 30 to 50% of Americans choosing to be vaccinated. We need something much closer to 100%, but that's a social problem. And we need media and social media and trusted authorities to help people understand why it's in everyone's interest to become vaccinated. In that gap between ideal and what will happen, we have medicines, and that's why we're working on the antibodies right now.
What lessons about the healthcare system, good or bad, are you drawing, should we draw from the COVID experience?
Yeah, I think about a couple things. One is the flexibility of the system is high. I think one difference from Europe to the East Coast of the US, when we had almost a parallel outbreak, although tragedies occurred and too many lives were lost, I think it's safe to say that the extra capacity of the U.S. healthcare system really showed up. And wards of hospitals were repurposed, and thank goodness that occurred. In places even like Houston and Miami, that happened, and we absorbed enormous caseloads. Whereas I'm sure you read tragically in some more socialized healthcare systems where there's more rigid capacity, they did become overwhelmed, and I think it led to more loss of life. That's a good thing. It's expensive, but it bore out as valuable during the middle of the crisis. The second thing is that medicine is a learning discipline. And there have been real improvements in survival in hospitals since those early days. By some reports, as much as 2/3 improvement. So that if you're admitted to the hospital today, your probability of leaving in a healthy state has gone up dramatically. And I think that's a good thing, even without new medicines. And of course, the final thing is what we do, which is make medicines to work with the good care doctors provide. And that's happened quickly. And I think combination therapy in particular has helped advance treatment course. But we can move faster. I think the spreading of knowledge still isn't universal. Do I have confidence that everyone gets the same care in this country? No, I think that's been a disappointment so far, is that depending on your income, if you know where to go versus not where to go, and even differences between doctors has borne out in unnecessary mortality and morbidity.
Dave, it's easy to forget in all of the excitement over synthesized antibodies that Eli Lilly is a leader in treatments for cardiac conditions, migraines, several types of cancers, diabetes, and other illnesses. Will the public's image of drug companies change as a result of the scientific triumphs in the fight against the coronavirus, or will the beatings resume once the pandemic is over?
Well, I hope that people think about our work differently. I can tell you we do. And one gauge of how effectively companies are we in a business of health, or are we helping people with their health, and that's a good business? I think inside my company, that's even shifted quite a bit, and I thought we were in a good place to start. We've never had a more motivated, purpose-filled group of 35,000 people than the one I'm leading today. Will that spread beyond our walls? Well, I hope so. I think even the conversation about antibodies over the weekend in the lay press has helped people understand, boy, these are really quite profound scientific advancements. They're happening quickly, and they could help someone I care about. Will that memory last? Maybe is the question you didn't ask. There may be a short-term halo, and I think that's incumbent on two things. One, us finding better ways to simply explain what we do. We make things very complicated, and I think that's been a challenge for us. And then two, discovering more important cures, working on important diseases that take people's lives. You know, this year in the US, COVID will be the third most common reason someone dies, which is incredible and a tragedy beyond description. But it's the third most. Still, more people die of cardiovascular disease and cancer than will have been killed by COVID. That happened last year too. Yet the news media, the energy around that were not the same. But probably we didn't describe what we do and the advances we're making in those areas as well as we have this year. So hopefully we can all take lessons from that. And one thing we all learned is without our health, we don't have much. And we're in the business of helping improve people's health. We can explain that better, I think, in the future.
Dave Ricks, it's great to see you. We wish you all the luck in the world with the work you're doing against the coronavirus and these other illnesses. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me on.